The night I came home early from a conference in Denver, I wasn't trying to catch anyone. I was just tired. My flight landed 2 hours ahead of schedule. My back ached from 3 days of hotel mattresses, and all I wanted was my own bed, my own pillow, and maybe a glass of water from the kitchen sink because for some reason that water always tasted better than anywhere else on earth. I didn't call ahead. I figured my wife would be happy to see me early. 22 years of marriage. You stop announcing yourself. I pulled into the driveway at 11:14 p.m. I remember the time because I checked my phone to see if my son had texted me back. He hadn't. The porch light was off, which was unusual. My wife always left it on when I traveled. Always. It was one of those small things she did that I used to think meant she loved me. I let myself in through the garage, set my bag down quietly so I wouldn't wake the dog, walked through the kitchen, poured that glass of water, drank half of it standing at the sink, and then I heard it. Low voices from upstairs. Not the television. Voices. 2 of them. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for what felt like a long time. Maybe it was 30 seconds. Maybe it was 3 minutes. I don't know. I just stood there with half a glass of water in my hand while something in my chest started quietly coming apart. I went up. The bedroom door was open 2 inches. Just 2 inches. And I stood in the hallway of the house I had paid for. The house where I'd carried my wife over the threshold. The house where both of my children had taken their first steps. And I looked through that 2-inch gap, and I saw everything I needed to see and everything I never wanted to see for the rest of my life. I won't describe it. I don't need to. You already know. What I will tell you is that the man in my bed was someone I had known for 19 years. Someone who had been the best man at my wedding. Someone whose kids had grown up alongside my kids. Who had sat at my Thanksgiving table. Who had borrowed my truck twice and returned it both times with a full tank of gas like that somehow made him a decent human being. My brother-in-law, my wife's older brother, Marcus. I went back downstairs. Sat down at the kitchen table in the dark. Finished the water. Thought about a lot of things. Thought about my son, 20 years old, away at college. Thought about my daughter, 17, asleep in her room down the hall, 30 feet from where her mother was doing what her mother was doing. Thought about a fishing trip Marcus and I had taken 4 years ago in Montana, 2 days on the river drinking cheap beer, him telling me I was the best thing that ever happened to his sister. I thought about that for a long time. Then I picked up my bag, went back to the garage, got in my car, and drove to a Holiday Inn 12 minutes away. I did not sleep. Here's what you need to understand about the next 3 weeks. I did not confront anyone. I did not yell, cry, throw things, send texts, or post anything anywhere. I went to work every morning. I came home every evening. I ate dinner with my wife and, on the night she was home, my daughter. I watched television. I said goodnight. I behaved, to all outward appearances, like a man who had no idea his life had been rearranged, but I had already called a lawyer on day 2. A good one. A woman my colleague had used 2 years earlier during a very ugly divorce. Someone who had a reputation for being methodical and unforgiving. I told her everything. She told me to document, preserve, and say nothing. I documented. I preserved. I said nothing. I also ordered a home DNA testing kit online, the kind that processes saliva samples. I told my daughter it was for a school genealogy project she'd mentioned months ago, and she thought it was sweet that I remembered. She swabbed. I swabbed. I asked my wife if she wanted to do it too, just to complete the family picture, and she said, sure, why not, with the easy confidence of someone who has no idea the ground is moving under her feet. I sent the samples in. I want to pause here and tell you what I was thinking in those 3 weeks, because I know what you might be wondering. You might be wondering why I stayed in that house, why I kept eating dinner, why I kept saying goodnight. The honest answer is that I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing. Part of me was functioning on autopilot. Part of me was building a case. And part of me, the part I'm least proud of, was hoping the DNA results would come back and give me some good news, some small mercy, something to hold on to. They did not. My daughter was my daughter. That part was fine. That part I held on to. But the kid also confirmed what my lawyer had already told me to be prepared for. See, I had also sent in a sample for my son. I'd held on to a water bottle from his last visit home. The results came back on a Tuesday afternoon, and I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and read them on my phone. And I learned that the boy I had coached in Little League, the boy I had taught to drive a stick shift in an empty Costco parking lot, the boy who called me every Sunday from college just to talk, was not biologically mine. 43 years old, and I learned that in a parking garage on a Tuesday, I sat in that car for 2 hours. Then I went back upstairs and finished my workday because I didn't know what else to do with my body. My lawyer said what she always said: document, preserve, wait. I waited 1 more week. I needed one more thing. I had suspected for a while that this was not new, that this was not a recent mistake, not a moment of weakness after a hard year. The way Marcus had looked in my house. Too comfortable. The way my wife sometimes mentioned his name in conversation with the easy casualness of someone who says a word so often it has lost its weight. I needed to know how long. I hired a private investigator, a quiet, professional man who had clearly spent many years watching people do things they shouldn't. He took 2 weeks and gave me a report that was 31 pages long. The first documented evidence of the affair was from 11 years ago. 11 years. But there was a note at the end of the report, something the investigator had flagged almost as an afterthought. A detail he'd picked up from going through some old social media posts and cross-referencing dates. He wrote, "Based on the timeline, you may want to consult with someone about the period immediately following your wedding." I read that sentence 4 times. Then I called my mother. My mother is 71 years old. She lives 40 minutes away in the house where I grew up. She has a garden she tends every morning and a cat named Harold, and she makes the best biscuits I have ever eaten in my life. I have always believed, without question, that she was on my side. I drove to her house on a Saturday morning. I told her I needed to talk. She made coffee and we sat at the same kitchen table where I had eaten breakfast for 18 years of my childhood, and I told her what I had found. All of it. The DNA. The investigator. The 11 years. She listened. She did not look shocked. That's the part I keep coming back to. She did not look shocked. I asked her directly, "How long have you known?" She put her coffee cup down very carefully, and she said, "I didn't know for certain." I said, "But you suspected." She didn't answer right away, and in that silence, in the kitchen where she had baked my birthday cakes and helped me with homework and told me she was proud of me more times than I could count, I understood that she had known something. Maybe not everything, but something, and she had chosen, for reasons I still don't fully understand, to say nothing. She started to explain. She said she hadn't wanted to hurt me. She said she'd thought it was over, that it was just something that happened once, early on, and that my wife had told her it was a mistake and it would never happen again. She said she had believed her. She said she hadn't wanted to destroy our marriage over something she wasn't sure about. I listened to the whole thing. I let her finish. Then I said, "My son is not mine." She closed her eyes. I said, "He's 20 years old, and I found out in a parking garage." I stood up. I thanked her for the coffee. I drove home. I didn't call her for 6 weeks after that. It was the longest I had ever gone without speaking to my mother in my entire life, including the 2 years I lived abroad in my 20s. 6 weeks is a long time to be that kind of quiet. My lawyer filed the divorce papers on a Monday morning. My wife was served at work. She called me 4 times in the first hour. I let them go to voicemail. By the 3rd message, the tone had shifted from confused to frightened, and by the 4th, it had shifted again to something harder and colder. The voice of a woman recalibrating, deciding how to play this. I didn't call back. She came home that evening and I was sitting in the living room waiting for her. I had asked my daughter to stay at a friend's house that night. I didn't want her to hear what was going to be said. My wife sat down across from me. She had clearly spent the drive home deciding on an approach because she led with something I hadn't expected. She didn't deny it. She said she was sorry. She said it had been a mistake. A long mistake. She knew that. She had always known that. But that it didn't change what we had built together. That I was her husband and she loved me and she didn't want to lose our family. I let her talk. When she was done, I said, "Our son isn't mine." The color left her face. I said it again, very quietly, because I wanted to make sure she heard it correctly. I had a DNA test done. Our son is not my biological child. She didn't say anything for a long time, and then she said something that I will remember for the rest of my life, something I have turned over in my mind 1,000 times since, something I have described to my therapist and my lawyer and my closest friend, and every time I describe it, I watch their face do the same thing. She said, "You were always going to be fine. You're the kind of man who lands on his feet." I needed someone who understood that sometimes people make choices, and those choices don't have to mean the end of everything. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "I want you out of this house by the end of the week." She said, "You can't do that." I said, "My lawyer disagrees." The divorce itself took 14 months. I won't walk you through every detail because some of it is still difficult to talk about, and some of it is genuinely tedious in the way that all legal proceedings are tedious, full of paperwork and waiting and phone calls that go unreturned for days. What I will tell you is that my lawyer was exceptional. What I will tell you is that paternity fraud in our state carries real legal consequences, and that my wife's attorney was not as prepared for that argument as they should have been. What I will tell you is that Marcus, when he was deposed, said almost nothing useful to anyone, which was perhaps the most honest thing he had done in 19 years. What I will also tell you is that my daughter, who found out the way children always find out, too much, too fast from sources she shouldn't have had to rely on, sat in my car in front of her school one afternoon 3 months into the proceedings and cried for 40 minutes while I held her hand, and then dried her eyes and said, "Dad, I just want you to know that none of this is about me and you. You're my dad. That's not changing." I've thought about that sentence almost every day since. My son called me from college the week after his mother told him about the DNA results. I had wanted to be the one to tell him, but she got there first, and I have made a certain kind of peace with that, though it took a while. The call lasted an hour and 40 minutes. He cried. I cried. He asked me if I was angry at him, and I told him that was the single most absurd question I had ever been asked in my life, and that I loved him, and that nothing about a lab result was going to change the fact that I was his father, that I had been his father since the moment he was born, that I would be his father until the day I died. He said, "What do I call Marcus now?" I said, "Whatever you want, or nothing at all. That's yours to decide." He has not spoken to Marcus since. That was his decision, and I have respected it completely. The settlement was finalized on a Thursday in March. My wife got certain things. I got the house, which mattered to me more than I expected it to, though I have since repainted every room because I needed it to look different than it did before. I got full shared custody of my daughter. My son was 20 by that point and beyond the reach of custody arrangements. But he came home the summer after the divorce was finalized and spent 3 months here, sleeping in his old room, eating breakfast with me every morning. And we rebuilt something between us that I think is actually stronger now than it was before, because it is built on honesty instead of assumption. Marcus and my wife are apparently still together. Someone mentioned this to me at a mutual friend's birthday party last fall, and I nodded and changed the subject. I don't have opinions about the relationship. I don't have the energy. My mother and I found our way back to each other slowly. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick, and it required some very hard conversations about what trust means and what loyalty means and what a parent owes a child even when that child is a grown adult. I don't think she fully understands what her silence cost me, but I also know she is 71 years old and she is my mother, and she was trying in her flawed and misguided way to protect something. I have chosen to accept that and move forward. Most days that feels like the right decision. There's one more thing I want to tell you, and it is the thing I think about when I am being honest with myself about all of this. About 6 months after the divorce was final, I was cleaning out a closet and I found a box of old photographs from our wedding. I sat on the floor for a long time looking through them. There's a photograph of me and Marcus at the reception, arms around each other laughing at something one of us had just said. We looked genuinely happy. We look like two men who trust each other completely. I don't know exactly when he started. I don't know if it was before the wedding or after. The investigator gave me a first documented date, but he also told me that documentation and reality are not always the same thing. There may be things I will never know for certain. What I know is this. I spent a long time being the man who kept the peace, who didn't make waves, who prioritized stability and quiet over confrontation, who told himself that a good life was built on looking forward and not picking at things that seemed fine on the surface. I was proud of that version of myself. I thought it was a kind of strength. It wasn't. Or at least, it wasn't only that. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is look clearly at the thing you have been refusing to look at. Not because it feels good, not because the truth is always clean or kind or even useful, but because you cannot build anything real on a foundation you are pretending is solid. I know that now. I learned it later than I should have. I repainted the bedroom first, covered the walls in a color my wife had always said she didn't like, a dark blue-green that the paint store called deep ocean, and I lay in my bed the first night after it dried and looked at those walls and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was sleeping in my own room. My daughter came home that weekend and walked in and said she loved the color. My son called that Sunday like he always does. We talked for an hour about nothing in particular. Baseball, a class he's taking, a restaurant near his campus he thinks I should try when I visit. It was, in every way that matters, a good Sunday. That is the whole story. That is all of it. If something here stayed with you, if you've ever stood in the hallway in the dark and known something you weren't ready to know, I think you understand why I needed to tell it. Not for revenge, not even for closure. Just to say it out loud, to someone, so it doesn't live only inside me anymore. Take care of yourselves out there.